Everybody dreams of a clamp rack filled with clamps. I have. And I lived with a clamp rack filled with clamps. And it's not all it's cut out to be. The only time a clamp rack makes sense is if you have a 2,000 square foot shop. In my small shop at home, my 300 square foot shop, this would just be in the way everywhere. In a 2,000 square foot shop, the clamp rack is just never where you need it to be. So I'm not going to throw this clamp rack out because it's actually nice, and we'll fill it up with clamps. But we have been living out of boxes in regards to clamps for months now. Bessie, when we got the shop, Bessie was super, super great, and they sent us this literal pallet of clamps. And it was a little overwhelming, and I didn't know where the clamps needed to be. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm glad I waited, because while we've been working on the shop and in the shop, the clamps told us where they want to be. So now we're just gonna listen to the clamps. That's a weird sentence. So like I said, clamps just turn up where they want to be. Came in here one weekend, immediately after hanging this shelf that I put up here for, you know, things like tape and pencils, and it was covered in clamps. And it made entire sense all of a sudden. This is where we need the majority of our F-style clamps. These are like the workhorse in any workshop. They're the clamp you reach for nonstop. Somebody had obviously decided that this is where they all needed to live. I don't think they all need to be here, but a lot of them are going to wind up here. So we're going to build a rack under this shelf for the clamps to sit right about there so that I get my shelf back, because I wanted my shelf. The other thing that we're going to do is, beforehand, I hung up this cleat, and there's a 5-degree angle on the bottom and a 5-degree angle on the top, and we're going to hang some clamps. We've got some larger parallel clamps right there. But Ben, that's really inconvenient. The dust collector's in the way. Dust collector has to be here because that's where the outlet for the dust collector is. Clamps need to be here because I want them by the bench. So you're just going to have to reach over the dust collector to get to the clamps. You're not pulling for 48-inch parallel clamps all the time. I think that that's the most convenient spot for them, though. So that's where they're going to go. So I used a 1.5-inch spacer block on the last one because 3/8 plus 3/8 plus 3/4 math. But I'm going to use a bigger spacer block and cut some more. Now that's right, because I can just reach in and grab one. Quality over quantity here. All right, so this is, for all intents and purposes, a weird little box joint jig. But we got a lot of clamps, and I think this is going to be worth it. Let that dry. I've got our little weird finger joint jig, and I am going to double stick tape it to our fence. And I'm going to place this one right there to line up with the blade. Now, one thing I wanted to make sure is sometimes people will make clamp racks so that the clamps have to be closed. And in my own shop, I think I'd be okay with that. This is a shared shop, and even putting clamps back in the right place seems to be a lot for some people, so I'm not going to ask them to do anything more than just put the clamp back. That works for me. They stay up nicely. Yeah, I'm pleased with this. I was in the hardware store and I saw ladder hooks, and I thought that they would be perfect to just hang these ratcheting squeezy clamps on. We got to find out what the name of these things are. At home, I always squeeze them onto a shelf or something like that, but the problem with that is these are like the clamps that you need in the heat of the moment, and you want to be able to just reach out and grab them and not be worried about unlocking it. And these are really easy to unlock, but I just think it's going to be easier if they're just hanging up on a hook. So you don't even have to clamp them down. If you do clamp them down, great. If you don't, they still work. So since we saw you last, I hung up a bunch of shelves here for drill bit storage, and I mounted this pipe flange to the wall because I want clamps right next to the drill press. And this just screws on the wall. I've got a 12-inch, half-inch galvanized pipe here, and we could just hang clamps on it. And I wish I could find some hockey tape around here. In the States, it's kind of hard to find.
Well, you need some hockey tape, Ben? Hang on a sec. Here you go, bud.
Oh, thanks, Vic. All right, now, if we put a clamp on there, it stays no problem. That's perfect, thanks. The clamps that we're gonna keep on this pipe, I'm gonna have 2 of the bigger Bessies for actual clamping the fence on the drill press, and 2 smaller for clamping stop blocks to the fence. And those just go like so. And at a drill press, you have to have wooden hand screws. I know that wooden hand screws drive some people nuts. We'll link a video below explaining how to use wooden hand screws. Once you master the use of a wooden hand screw, you'll wonder how you lived without them. But I want at least one to live here. And the reason being, wooden hand screws are perfect for holding tall things at the drill press, like so, to hold it straight and just drill in the end of a large piece or a dowel or whatever. The other thing that these do is if you have a small piece, you put it in the wooden hand screw, and now your hands are not holding the small piece while you're working at the drill press. Your hands are holding the wooden hand screw. Can't live without these in the shop. They're gonna live right there. Another thing that wooden hand screws excel at is at the router table. If you need to just put a stop lock on something real quick for a stopped rabbet or something like that, wooden hand screws, it's your stop block, it's the whole works all in one. I want 4 clamps to live at the table saw. We love using L fences at the table saw. This is just a L-shaped piece of wood that connects to the rip fence and allows you to do all sorts of things. Link below if you've never used an L fence. Normally, I would use a big beefy F clamp, but they're kind of hard to tighten and get the L fence in place. And honestly, these new trigger clamps are powerful enough that I have zero hesitation about using this to keep the L fence in place. It's not going anywhere. I think I'm converted for L fence to these trigger clamps, and they're just going to live on the end of the rail for the rip fence. And the other 2 clamps that are just going to live here two clamps, two little clamps for something like a stop block. And the only reason I want two is sometimes, most of the time, you're just going to use one clamp on a stop block, and that's fine. But if you need a long stop block, you need two clamps. And these little clamps are just perfect. They stay out of the way. They don't hang down. They're not too heavy. These are going to stay here. They're small enough that I bet they live right there. But we'll probably just store them on the rip fence rail as well. I lied, the clamp rack stays. I don't condone clamp racks for most use cases. This is a big enough shop that it warrants it, and we have enough clamps that it definitely warrants it. This is where our special use case clamps are going to be. These are not daily drivers. These are really, really nice to have clamps, but not something that we need to use every day. Unlike these are the everyday clamps. And like I've said, the everyday clamps are going to be situated where they're going to be used every day. This brings up a point though. This is a lot of clamps. Keep in mind that this is a group shop. There's multiple people working here. So that's why we have a lot of clamps. There might be multiple glue-ups going on at the same time. There's also a possibility that we do classes or something at some point, so we need a lot of clamps. I don't want anyone to think for a minute that you need this many clamps to get into woodworking or to do some serious woodworking. It's certainly nice to have more clamps around. We all know the joke, you can never have too many clamps, but you don't need that many clamps. Please never look at somebody on YouTube or on the internet or on TV and see all the clamps that they have and say, wow, I'll never be able to afford that many clamps. I can't do that type of work. It's not true at all. This is a lot of clamps. We're really lucky and happy to have them. But the clamps that you see situated at the little stations, those are the ones that we really need. Everything else, nice to have. So, yeah, put your clamps where you're going to use them. Don't put them on a cart and have to wheel the cart everywhere you go in the shop. This takes up the space of a bandsaw, right? My personal shop, I don't have room for anything like this. My clamps are all situated under my bench, on a wall, and honestly, in the garage. My big long clamps are in the garage because I use them once every 6 months. So don't worry about a big old clamp rack. Put the clamps where you need them, right where you're going to be working, and get to work.